Go ahead, Pranay.
Sure. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Indian Debating League. And right off the bat, I am here to say today we have for you a very interesting segment, an interview so legendary that we have the legend of legends with us themselves. Today we have Aniket Chakravorty, the world's university debating champion. You got that right. Listen to it slow and loud. The world's university debating champion. The one who knows exactly how to argue, present their knowledge, apply it to scenarios, and ladies and gentlemen, there's nobody like them right now. And they went to Vietnam just a few weeks back and showcased their talent in the cream of their element. I introduce him to the panel today. Aniket, it's a pleasure to have you. How are you?
Hmm. Mute.
Aniket, I think you're on mute.
Yes, I think Aniket, you're still on mute, and everyone you requested to please be on mute.
Okay, there we go. There we go. It's working. Sorry, it wasn't letting me unmute, and now it is. So now I can talk.
It's completely.
Sorry about that. Yeah, no, I'm good. I'm happy. Thanks for the very kind introduction. Sorry for the technical delay. Yeah. No, I'm just happy to be here. Yeah.
We're happy to have you here, Aniket. And honestly speaking, I don't know about others. I don't know about this interview. Personally, as a debater, it's an honor to interview you over here. And I just can't wait to get all that secret sauce, all that information you have for us, and really apply all the skills I can and learnings from you into my own debating and my debating career, really. So, a pleasure to have you. For those who don't know, which honestly feels like they're living under a rock, obviously he's won the WDC 2024. He was one of the top 10 speakers in Vietnam, and he's the open semi-finalist, Black Sea European University Debating Champion. He's also the Cambridge Ivy Open finalist. So, ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Aniket Chakravorty. Now, Aniket, just to jump right into the interview, right? I wanted to get to know, how do you feel? You know, you've won the epitome of debating. What's on your mind?
Yeah, it feels kind of surreal. I started debating, and you watch the videos of the World's finals, and you think, wow, look at all these people, they're so smart. I wish I could be up there one day. You have your mentors who help you along, who have got impressive CVs or whatever, and you think you'll never surpass them, and then to go back and go and win Worlds, it doesn't feel real completely. Maybe it hasn't fully sunk in, but obviously, yeah, it feels, like vindication for all the work that you put in to try and improve. So yeah, it's kind of surreal, but also justifying in a way. Yeah, that's how I describe it.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's an absolute fairy tale finish, is what I believe, right? To all those years of hard work. And I just wanted to know, can you describe your debating journey from your grassroots level of debating when you started out to right now? Just give me everything. What's happening?
Yeah, so I started, at school, when I was what, 14, 13, 14. My school didn't have that great of a debate club, but I kind of grinded away for, 4 or 5 years. Was never that successful in the school circuit. And then I joined university, started at Oxford, and I think I got a lot better when I shifted to university debating, put much more work in. And I continued on that for 3 years until Vietnam, basically. So yeah, that's my debating journey. It's not, there have been struggles within that to some extent, like setbacks. I had like barely missing the break at Worlds in 2021, for example, stuff like that. But yeah, it's been pretty smooth, I guess, overall. Yeah.
Understood. So I understand that you also had so much experience with the school's debating circuit, although it's the university one where you really, outclassed everyone really. And on in this interview right now, we have so many school debaters right from India watching you, getting inspired. So, as somebody who's done both of these circuits, could you just share with me personally what your take is on the two formats from WSDC to BP, really what the differences are, so on and so forth?
Yeah, so I mean, I never did that much WSDC. I mainly did BP at school. But I think in terms of the differences between the two formats, in some ways, the World Schools format in some ways more true to what an ideal debate should be, I think. Like, there's the strategic element is much less present. It's much more about just coming up with the true arguments or the genuine case in favor of one side or the other. Whereas BP also adds that strategic dimension to it. So I think that's definitely the biggest difference between the two. Yeah.
Understood. And you spoke about the setbacks, right? Walk through the idea of what these setbacks are and how you bounce back from them for these debaters now. Because, of course, that's something that India has to shine through, right? We've not done well at the university level yet, but we're getting there and we are ready to pounce one year at a time. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think the Indian debating circuit is improving all the time. I think you guys had some excellent teams at Worlds this year. But in terms of the setbacks, yeah, so at my first Worlds, I think we went into the closed rounds on 14 points or 15, something like that. And we ended up missing the break by I think 5 speaks across 9 rounds. So on literally the most narrow of margins. And that was very depressing. It really it was felt awful, for a long time. I felt like I hadn't proven myself and all of this, but ultimately, I think that kind of thing was motivation. Like ultimately, I think that's really what the value of debating is that you're faced with these kinds of setbacks, but it's debating, so it's not like the most important thing in the world, but it still forces you to react to those kind of failures and put the work in to recover and improve. And so actually, I think that's what kind of helped me recover from it is, I had friends who kind of explained to me that actually that failure was very valuable and moving on from it and being able to succeed in the long term was something that was something really worth doing. And that's, I think, is what helped me get over it. Yeah.
So it's sort of like creating an environment around you, which, makes you feel like you're propelled to win due to the setback, that it motivates you, what you can take back from it, and making the most of the situation, if I'm not wrong. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a combination of that. And also, I think for me, the helpful thing was, putting debate in its proper context. Like it's important, sure, but it's not the be all and end all of everything. And I think that realization actually ironically helped me get a lot better because I wasn't super stressed about every single competition or every single tournament. So it's a combination of those two things. Yeah.
That makes sense. And now we've spoken about how you use these little moments, these setbacks as inspiration, but generally speaking, what particular debate or let's say a debater has inspired you to go ahead and go for Worlds and win it this time?
Yeah, so I have a few. I think I've been very lucky in that I've had very good mentors who have helped me along in my journey. So Jack Sinnott and Keeman Hamill, they used to debate for TCD Hiss. I think they have the record for the most number of points at Euros. They were big inspirations and helped me a lot to improve. Tekway Tan, who was a debater for Oxford back in the day, he helped me even from my school's days, but he helped me a lot more recently. And I think the way he debates is super inspirational. So those would be the main ones. Also, like my debate partner for a long time, not Mark, who I won Wilds with, but previously Zarina, she was like an idol for me on the school circuit. And then we ended up partnering together at the uni level, which was very nice. Beatrice as well is another person who we kind of did competitions together back in the day. We came up through the ranks together, I think, and we hopefully, I think, inspire each other to get better. So those would be the kinds of people I'd mention. Yeah.
Understood. And right at the bat, hearing so many names come in, ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, debating not just about making enemies, about making friends for sure, because that's what I see really. And moving swiftly on, I also wanted to know, what are your future plans now? You won Worlds. I've heard that you're also taking up a position, particularly where mentoring is concerned. So what's your future plan where debating is concerned?
Yeah, I'm not too sure. I mean, I think, I think as for competitive speaking, I think that's it. Continuing feels slightly hollow, I think. But I think I'm coaching at Oxford much more now, and I think I might start seeing some competitions. I'm seeing the IIT competition that's coming up, I think. Yeah, I'm going to pivot more towards judging, CAing, coaching, that kind of thing, because I think as far as speaking goes, yeah, that's more or less it for me.
That makes sense. And I also wanted to know now, getting into the technicality of things, how do you prepare for a debate? If I'm sitting in the room with you, you're given a topic, what does that scene look like?
Yeah, so I think the way that I try and do it is, I think that rather than trying to just think of arguments straight away, I think what I try and do is kind of think of like, two things. So first of all, what the world looks like and what the fundamental thing that the motion is changing, how that impacts like the world in general. So you start from looking at the world itself and try and develop arguments from there rather than coming up with arguments straight off the bat. And the second thing is think of the outcome that you might want, and then think about the series of necessary conditions that would lead to that outcome, and then think about how the motion enables that. So that sounds abstract, but I give an example. The World's quarterfinal this year, the one about the pact of forgetting in post-conflict states, the outcome that every single team will want in that debate is post-conflict reconstruction and good outcomes for the particular state. So the way we thought about that motion, me and Mark in prep time, is like, what are the series of things that are required in order to get that? We said that one of them was kind of dismantling rebel groups that are present in the region that might otherwise cause an insurgency. And then our case was basically showing that the pact of forgetting would alienate those rebel groups and cause them to continue conflict. And so you'd be unable to reach the outcome. So that's kind of how I prep, is like, think about the goal that you want, think about what would have to happen in order to get that, and think about how the motion either uniquely enables those things or uniquely prevents those things from happening.
So you like work your way backwards, think about what the end goal looks like, and then just put in the pieces later on, like fill in the blanks.
Kind of, yeah, kind of. Either approach works. Either you pick the end goal or you just think about the world itself, and then that, I think, will generate arguments that you maybe haven't thought of previously. Yeah.
Understood.
But
And
it's all about having that like unified strategy that will get you to win the debate rather than just having like some arguments,
yeah, understood. And it also makes sense for me to ask you this question over here then, because there are so many kinds of motions, from the this house believes motion to this house should motion. Is your strategy particularly the same for all of the kinds of motions, or does it differ, or do you know the kind of motions which are most common and therefore you prepare a bit accordingly as per them? Like, what's the situation where the motion?
Yeah, so I think the strategy is a bit different for actor motions, like this house as, I don't know, Ukraine would go for a peace deal or something. It's a bit different in those kind of motion because then you have to think about what the actor's interests are. I think that one thing that Mark and I did a lot, and this is more, I guess, niche advice, but we kind of looked into motions that the CAs had set previously and tried to develop themes coming from that. So we knew that this CA team really liked motions about like norms or those kinds of things. And then obviously that was relevant because round 9 and the final were motions like that. And so we had like specific strategies that would deal with those kinds of motions, which we tried to implement and that paid off to a pretty good extent. So yeah.
And oddly, when you're going into such a world championship, no preparation. I mean, that's what you would believe, at least while going into preparation. No amount of preparation you will do is enough, because that's the level of debating you're doing. So I wanted to ask you how much preparation goes into it, how much time a day perhaps, and how many topics do you go through in a year maybe to even get to the world and be like, yes, I am ready to take on this massive bull in front of me.
Yeah, it's hard. You know, I think I'm very lucky in that like the work I do for my degree and the kind of things I'm interested in play into debating naturally. So it's not like, I would set concrete time aside every day to just like practice debating and that would be it. But I'm lucky in that, the course that I do, which was politics, philosophy, and economics, and now more philosophy, the reading I do there is relevant for debating. I also just quite like reading the news and, going on The Economist or the Financial Times or whatever and do that on a daily basis as just a natural habit. And so it doesn't even feel like I'm practicing for debating, even though that reading that stuff is very helpful for debating. So yeah, I would say, in the run up to Worlds, Mark and I, we maybe did 1 or 2 spars every week. We did a lot of the prep competitions, but actually a lot of the work that we put in by virtue of being related to other stuff that we had in our interest, didn't even feel that much like work. It just felt like stuff that we were doing for the sake of interest. Yeah.
Two things, ladies and gentlemen. First, the meme where politics, philosophy, and economics is concerned. You put in any stance and you just argue for it till death, pretty much, and you get marks, is what I've heard through the Instagram reels. And also, the second part, which is if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And I think that's what it's all coming down to. Really, just making debating very inherent to your nature. If I might get that right. And I also wanted to know. I mean, give me a random ballpark number, right? How many topics do you go through? Is it like a 10,798 topics that you go throughout the, or do you more like work more on themes and researching themes in particular? A
I
broad
don't
overview.
know. Yeah, I think it's more about researching broad themes. Because obviously, it's going to be highly unlikely that you practice a specific motion and then that motion is set at Worlds again, because obviously at Worlds they try and set new motions, right? So I think that general thematic experience is more important. I mean, I don't know. In terms of the competitions that we've done, obviously, like both Mark and I were going in fairly experienced and we'd been debating for a really long time. So I couldn't tell you the like number of hours that I put in. What I would say is that I put in less work as I got better. So I definitely was much more grind set when I was like a novice at university. Then I would do competitions like every weekend, but I stopped doing that as much and I got more of a balance as I got older. And I think that like the constant level of practice after a while has diminishing returns, I think, and it's more important to like focus on broadening your knowledge or like identifying what it is that makes you really special as a speaker and developing those rather than just banging away at like doing debate after debate.
Okay, to summarize, would it be sort of to say that you're only self-aware about your strengths and weaknesses, so you just adjust accordingly in the time, and also in the beginning, really consistent with your work and with your schedule to really get to know the current affairs and apply them in tournaments.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's right.
Understood. And going to the next question, right? Something which most debaters, particularly, at least what I understand, really look forward to. When you're debating at this level, right? There's so much exhaustion that comes to your mind. Actually, there's a lot of mental exhaustion because the debating or competitive debating goes on for hours and hours in one go. There are so many rounds to look forward to, all being really hectic. What is your strategy to improve your mental endurance? How do you stay put and really active in those rounds at Worlds?
Yeah, so I think that's a really important question. I personally, I think both Mark and I, we had our like routines that we would do before every round. So for me, it would be like standing in a particular place in the auditorium. For Mark, he would like listen to a specific song before every round. And those kinds of things were really useful in terms of getting us like back into the headspace of being ready for a particular debate. So those kinds of routines are really important. The other thing I think is really important, and this is something I only realized as I did more and more major competitions, is that I think it's really important to not spend your whole time at a major just debating. So one thing that we ended up doing is we did quite a bit of sightseeing on the like 3 days in Vietnam. And I think that was really important because I think at some point you need to divert your mind from the competition. And I didn't do that, at Madrid Worlds, which still went relatively well for me. I didn't like engage in that. It was just debate 24/7. And that I think was a mistake. So it's worth like having a routine to get you ready for the round, but also being able to switch off and, talk to your friends or do some sightseeing or whatever.
Very interestingly, just your normal preparation days, how you go about your debate apart from Worlds as well. And then when it comes to the Worlds itself and how you deal with mental exhaustion, one thing is very simple: keeping debate very grounded in reality rather than thinking it's that one big kingpin you need to have on your debating CV, or perhaps the shiny trophy you want to show your mom back home, right? So it makes complete sense. You just have to just take a moment, one debate at a time. I understand that. Understood.
Absolutely.
And I also wanted to ask you, at Worlds, what do you think? And this is a student asked question, by the way, everybody. This is a question I've gotten from a lot of students in the Google Forms that you all have filled, which is, what do adjudicators look for in a good debater? Like when you start speaking, when you've gone through with like 30 seconds of your speech, what are the signs of a really good debater at Worlds, and how do you know that?
I think for me, the big sign of a really good speaker is if in the 30 seconds of like the beginning of your speech, if it becomes clear how you're going to win the debate. Like I think if you're able to like set that roadmap up or give an indication either through like a really interesting example, or like a specific roadmap or whatever. That kind of setup and framing, I think, is a big sign that separates people. Like, I think judges need to like want to know, like, want it to become clear exactly what it is that you're going to do, how you're going to win the debate, and you can motivate that through the use of particular examples in an introduction, or literally being explicit about like this is our path to victory or something like that. That I think is what judges are looking for, at least at the start of your speech, for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I want to ask, is it because, it demonstrate confidence firstly, but also because you literally take the judge's hand and walk them to the finish line pretty much right in the beginning and show them how you're going to do it and then you execute it, like just making it everything simple for them?
Yeah, I think it's exactly. I think it's about, making the judge's life as easy as possible. Like, I think it's about, I think it's about the judge because and this is especially true in out rounds. In an out round, you've got a panel of 7 people who have got to discuss 4 different teams, and they might not even spend that much time on you. And so you need to make sure that by the end of the debate, you have a really clear, like 2 or 3 sentence summarizable contribution that everyone can just point to and say, "Yep, that was in the debate. That was a clear thing," and give you credit for that.
Right. And how important is like team dynamics to winning a debate? Because you obviously can be the best speaker in the world, but yet not win if you don't have a
Yeah.
good team.
I think it's crucial. I've been very lucky in that both of my long-term debate partners, so both Serena and Mark, have been very good friends of mine, and we had a very good camaraderie outside of debating, and that I think was really important. I think it's really important to identify what skills. So, for example, Mark is really skillful because he's really funny, right? And so that kind of changes how I speak as well, because it means I'm like the serious speaker that gets the content out and then leaves room for Mark to like make jokes. So it's really important to like complement each other in the team and know what your different strengths are and play to those, but then also have a pretty good relationship with your teammate outside of debates, because you're going to be stuck in super stressful situations with this person. And so you kind of, hopefully you want to like get on with them fairly well. Yeah.
And do you also recommend, I mean, I'm just like walking off of what you just said, right? Do you also recommend that you should have a long-term partner? Because that's something which is seen very less sometimes, at the grassroots level, that you keep switching partners, you wait for them to be advocated. Do you really suggest sticking with somebody that you really know, understand, and can have a good team composition with?
So I think it's weird. I think it's a combination of both. So I think when you're starting off, it's really important to speak with lots of different people, because I think they can teach you different skills and teach you different aspects and help you change things up within that. So it's important to speak, like, not just super early on commit to one person, but I think certainly once you've been selected for a major competition, like once you've been selected for Worlds or ABP or WSDC or whatever it might be, that's when you have your consistent partner who you kind of speak with repeatedly, and becomes more kind of long term. Yeah.
Understood. And now going right into the India-centric questions, because my audience, my Hindustanis over here with me, they're going to be waiting for these ones, right? Because we really want to better ourselves. We want to come and get those titles ourselves. And the question is, and this is very odd because it's sort of like a SWOT analysis of India. What do you think are the biggest challenges the Indian debating circuit faces these days from your own outlook?
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest problem is kind of brain drain. Like, the biggest problem I think is super talented debaters from India leaving India. So Tejas is number 1 example, right? Like, he is the best speaker in the world, and obviously he's Indian, but he now debates for Stanford. Um, and I think part of that is like, I guess in terms of addressing that, I think the most important things are like, having a kind of consistent coaching level, having those alumni who leave come back and help out once in a while. And I think Dejas is very willing to help out. I'm willing to help out within India as well. And so that kind of network is really important. To be honest, I think the raw material in India is there. Like, the people at IIT, for example, or those elite institutions in India are like way smarter than like I am, or like anyone. Most people at Oxbridge are, just by virtue of like the brutal competition that you have to like go through in order to get into those places. So the raw material and talent, I think, is there. I think what's next is the kind of systematic coaching and like kind of polishing that rough talent and getting people to put the work in whilst balancing it with their other degrees in order to be successful. But I think that work is happening. Like, I think India is rising pretty significantly on the debating circuit at the moment. I think that's going to continue for sure.
And just to ask the obvious questions, because sometimes, the devil lies in the details, what does such a polishing really look like for the raw material which India might have to possess, especially as an expert over here at the subject?
Yeah, I think it's about like having kind of consistent practice, having, your weekly competition in your school or university where you have practice, where you bring everyone together, where you have someone judging, or like having kind of, workshops happen where prominent current debaters come in and give them, which I think have been happening with IIT. They've been doing them to some extent. So those kinds of things continuing are, I think, it's just about practice and like honing those skills by watching debates, by being a part of debates, and so on. And all the resources are there. It's all on the internet now. So yeah, it's very possible.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. And the 45, 50 people watching this right now and the thousands who will watch this on YouTube later, that is also a plugin. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, guys. I really hope people take this advice as inspiration, as their pathway to success, as he mentioned some time back, right? And really put in the work, ladies and gentlemen. We have what it takes. It's you're from the world champion themselves, really, right? And I also wanted to know, now you've been in this circuit for so long, right? You've seen it go up and down. And I wanted to know, has the circuit in India changed in comparison to when you started out?
Yeah, I remember doing IIT Bombay online in like 2020. And in those days, none of the like super top teams would be from Indian institutions. And I think that's changing now. Like I think there was a lot of success at ABP that recently occurred, a lot of success at Worlds with the ESL final and all of this. So definitely, I think there's been a lot of growth, and I think that's going to continue because I know there are people in India who are super committed to improvement. Meanwhile, on the world schools level, and the school circuit in India has been strong throughout. Like, before, I remember my last year of school was when Team India won the Tejas Bhavya Manya team, which was an insanely great team. And so I think that strength has continued. Like, I think Oscar and Lucia, who are coaching Team India, are doing a great job. So yeah, the school circuit has remained strong, and the university circuit, I think, has improved a huge amount in the time that I've been debating, for sure.
Fantastic. And for those, again, who've been living under a rock, yes, India was in the ESL finals of the WDC 2024 this year. So pat yourself on the back. That's India for you right now. And I also wanted to know, what's the difference between like the European debating circuit and the American debating circuit? So like, just give me a comparison and show me what's happening there.
Yeah. So I don't think differences are as big as they used to be because I think online brought everyone together. They got rid of a lot of these circuit norms. I think that the European debating circuit is very heavy on like framing and like trying to like make the debate kind of symmetrical and or kind of niche or whatever. Whereas I think Americans and actually Asians in particular are much more willing to just like take the strong line and just make the argument, which I actually prefer. So I think that's a good thing. I think that American speakers often are more content heavy than at least some European speakers. Although again, like Europe has been moving more in a direction of people running more and more content. So a lot of these distinctions have become less strong over time. But I think the big one is in Europe, people are much more interested in like framing and like kind of doing all this strategical stuff. Whereas I think in America, people just like make the arguments and try and like just win by strength of analysis alone kind of thing.
Understood. And in debates, there's so much about persuasion that is spoken about. Now, if debate was just about logic and facts itself, then it would have been an academic essay pretty much. So I wanted to know, how do you balance the idea of emotionally appealing to the audience and making it sound really fancy and getting them that way into the art of persuasion, where speaking is concerned, where lacing your speech with quotes, so on and so forth is concerned, and the facts themselves, the research themselves, especially considering the amount of time you have after the topic is given?
Yeah, so I think that style has made a comeback in debating, which I think is a good thing. When ever since returning in person. I think for me personally, what I try and do is try and have a rhetorically powerful introduction that I write out. So that's where I try and put that to try and really hook the audience in. Oftentimes, actually, the research plays into the style. So at least the way that I would try and do it is, if my introduction kind of uses a piece of knowledge that I have, it makes me sound like I know what I'm talking about. And so I think people are more willing to credit me. So actually, I think those two things kind of go hand in hand, where if you've got a good knowledge base and you can pull on particular examples, that makes you sound much more persuasive and appealing because it sounds like you know what you're talking about. My partner, Mark, is more funny. So he kind of has some jokes that he's able to improvise and has a funny manner within that, which works for him. I kind of go more on the really emotional aspect side of things. And that contrast, I think, really works as well. Like, I think if you're in a team with someone, both of you going for different styles and how you debate is really helpful.
Understood. And how do you approach cross-examinations and rebuttals?
Yeah, so I guess I was the first speaker, so I did rebuttal much less. What I try and do is try and think about, try and ask myself, like, what is the crucial thing that has to be proven in order for the other side's argument to work? And then try and respond to that premise, because oftentimes people are running so many arguments or giving so many reasons that you can't respond to all of them. So you have to kind of take out the core premise that is the underlying thing of their logic. And similarly, I think that those skills are actually really useful for your own positive material. So I think, one thing that I do a lot as a speaker is I try and preempt what the other side is going to say. So I try and think about what the weakest point of my argument is, or what opposition might say as a response to my argument, and then try and respond to that in my substantive speech. And that often throws a lot of people off and is, I think, a skill that's really worth pursuing.
Understood. So, funnily speaking, I mean, a rebuttal might be like disaster management after somebody says something in your speech. You are going with the preventive measures right before that so that they can't say
Exactly.
anything in the first place. That makes sense. I think, yeah, absolutely. That's valuable advice right there.
So,
Now,
to give an example, just to make it more concrete, like in the Wilds final, we run an argument about like innovation being prevented by this, and the very obvious government response is going to be, our innovation is symmetric, elites just get it happening on both sides anyway. This narrative doesn't change anything. So if you watch my speech back, there are literally bits where I say, now opposition will say that this doesn't change anything, but actually here are the reasons why this narrative specifically is necessary, or things like that. Yeah.
That makes sense. And I definitely feel like the applied presence of those examples makes it more, let's say, imaginable for the audience as well, and making them understand what you're talking about. I also wanted to ask you now, see, we spoke about the themes before and you've spoken about your researching process here and there. I wanted to delve deeper into your researching process and just see what lies over there, what pot of gold lies over there right now. And just to ask you, let's assume a theme is given to you. Given the times, it's artificial intelligence, right? That's the theme. You're going for a tournament next weekend. You have a week to prepare. And
Yeah.
you know the theme is going to be artificial intelligence again. What are the kind of research questions you enter into this, let's say, theme to start a debating file from scratch?
Yeah. So I think what I try and do is look up current debates on those issues. And I think it's about starting from a broader base and then going more niche. So, my go-to start is, I know it's kind of cringe, but my go-to is The Economist. So see what they're saying about AI, see if they recommend particular resources, and then go into it. I think specifically for things like AI or more technical material, a really good resource that some debaters use it, but I don't think enough debaters use it, is Substack. So I think there are a load of good Substack blogs that are really helpful for debating. So Slate Star Codex, for example, or it's like Astral Codex 10 now, whatever. But Scott Alexander basically is really good for AI and those kinds of things. Like, he had a really good blog post about whether you should pause AI development or not. So trying to find those kind of specific resources, Substack, I think, is a very good resource. Similarly, if you're doing an economics thing, like Money Stuff for Bloomberg is a really good resource. It's just a free email that you can subscribe to, and you get loads of complex economics analysis that is usable in debates, but also just makes you a more informed person. So those kinds of specific resources, I think, are really useful to use.
Understood. Does a research, is it just stored over here, or are you writing it down, annotating notes? What's that collection of research looking like?
Yeah, it depends on the person. I'm quite lucky in that I have quite a good memory. So the fully writing it down thing is not that helpful for me. But some people differ on that. Mark, for example, did find it really helpful to come up with a quick summary. I think for debating, you don't need like the biggest amount. You just need like a 4 or 5 line summary of every single thing that will help you if that is what you need. Yeah.
That makes sense. So you keep it simple. You like to run cases in your mind and just have the information stored for use, pretty much. And of course, like Mark might have a different approach.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. But that broad base of knowledge, I think, was really important. Like, I think that Mark and I really, the biggest advantage we had is just that we knew more than most people. And that was very helpful in loads of different debates. Yeah.
Understood. So knowledge truly sets you free in this
Yeah.
regard of understanding. Understood. And now that you're the coach of the Oxford Debating, Society, I wanted to ask you that going into this year, now, funnily speaking, now the pressure is off you and on you because people like me, the annoying ones, we're gonna come up to you. We're gonna pat you on the back and we're gonna ask you questions every time we see you, right? And my question is, if you could just, let's say, how on Instagram you have the automated responses, which because people are going to ask these questions and this matters to everybody in the world. XYZ, they send you a text, your advice goes right off. What's that kind of an advice you have to give everybody, which you can't stress on more?
Yeah, I thought about this a fair bit. I think the biggest thing I would say is that, I can say this now, right? The real value of debating doesn't come from winning worlds or achieving X, Y, Z in a competition. I think the real value of debating comes from, putting yourself in super stressful situations and forcing yourself to kind of confront all those things about yourself that only get revealed in those situations. And like that element of personal growth, I think, is the real value that debating has. So I would emphasize that for people that like don't just focus and obsess about winning the current competition that you're facing, but view debating as a kind of way to grow as a person. I think debating is a great way to do that because it's ultimately kind of low stakes, but it still puts you in those challenging situations. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Understood. And again, going back to the questions I got from the students at the beginning of this interview, I wanted to ask you, how do you become more concrete for your own speaker roles, whether with the, let's say, opening half or the closing half, so on and so forth?
Yeah, so I think that's a process of work with your debate partner. So in the olden days, I started off as a second speaker and I ended up shifting towards being a first speaker. I think that my skill set is much better for first speeches than it is for second speeches anyway. And I think that process was just about talking to my partner about it, trying to complement their strengths, trying to work out what it was that I was good at. And I think what it was that I was good at was coming up with kind of clever reasons and clever arguments for a particular thing. And those are skills I think that are rewarded in the first speech. And so I shifted into doing that. Yeah.
Understood. And just off the bat of my head, because I asked you a question about AI and I couldn't keep myself from asking this now. Do you incorporate any AI into your researching processes or your debating journey just to learn something particularly, which perhaps people can find helpful considering they're going into the generation of
Um,
generative AI?
yeah, I think, it kind of came a bit too late for me, right? Because, ChatGPT only came about kind of in the past year. But I think that ChatGPT and things like that are a useful resource. Like I think if you just type emotion into ChatGPT, it will give you like 8 or 9 arguments. And those are useful, but I would advise those not to be the be all and end all. Like I think at most that's just a starting point. And then I would urge people to like research the arguments that you find more compelling and try and develop more details in that and try and find the kind of niche resources that you think other people aren't going to have and use that because everyone is going to be using ChatGPT or whatever. So that's not what to use. Also, the same thing is like, there's a debating Facebook group where a really good debater, Ryan Lafferty, who made the semi-final at Vietnam, has now posted his matter file, and it's an incredible matter file. It has like 500 pages in it of just like every single argument you can think of, and it's great. But I would urge people to like use that, but use that as a starting point rather than the whole thing, because everyone is going to be using that. So you need to find some way to have your own kind of comparative advantage. And that I think comes from going into more niche things, more niche like Substack blogs, stuff like that. Yeah.
I think I'm getting like three things, like three observations when you say that. The first part being, of course, that you're always thinking about the competitive edge. Like one is you're bettering yourself, but you're also thinking of what will make me stand out. The second part, which comes to my mind automatically, is that you feel that obviously generative AI, of course, is very generalized in its way of information. It can't go deeper and deeper into topics the way perhaps a human being can. But I think the last thing which I realize is the human touch in terms of, when you do your research yourself and you spend 1 hour, even if it's to get the same results you would get with ChatGPT, I believe what you're going towards is that you learn more in that 1 hour than you will with the 15 seconds input with ChatGPT is concerned.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's also about finding examples that are particularly powerful for you so that you can sell them really well. So I would always use India as an example because it was one that's obviously close to me. You know, my whole family is there. And like I knew a fair bit about it and I have credibility speaking about it. And I would do my own research about that. And I think it's a really good example to use in debating because India literally has every single thing, every single issue that you can imagine is taking place there. So having those kind of specific tailored examples to you as a person, I think is really important. And so it's important that you individually engage in that research.
Absolutely. Now, I just wanted to open the floor up for the audience. If they have any questions, they can raise their hand first, just to make sure there are no clashes, particularly. And I'll pick about, let's say, 3 questions or 4 questions for the sake of time as we get into this interview, just to make sure everybody has their questions answered, considering I've not gone through all of them. I got so many questions on the Google form, but then, I'm a selfish man. I wanted to ask my own questions, to be very honest. So, any questions, guys? Any questions? Just raise your hand if there's any. Yes, Amara Ajay. Amara, can you hear me?
Yeah, I think that they're not allowed to unmute. That's the issue.
All right. Hold on. I think I can. Could you just type in your? Yeah, you can type it out in the chat. Absolutely. Till we wait, Aniket, so far I've learned so much, and I'm pretty sure everybody else has as well. Thank you for being so generous in the way you're sharing this information. It's an absolute gold mine. And I mean, I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure about one thing. But I'm pretty sure about one thing, which is if you yourself are watching this interview, let's say a year back, you would be thankful to yourself, and that's how we are feeling right now. So thank you so much for that. And Amara and Amog as well, Mitra, everybody just type in your questions in the chat so we can see it here and ask Aniket your questions and get it answered from the world champion himself. Okay, so I think Amog is asking the time over here. How could you suggest that we spend the preparation time that we get? So what does your preparation time look like in terms of allocation of time? How much time are you spending on?
That's a good question. I'll just talk about BP because that's what I have experience with. It's different for when you're in top half or when you're in closing half. When you're in opening half, what we do is spend about 2 minutes doing silent preparation to try and develop our own ideas. We have a discussion again for about 3 minutes about after that. So we're up to 5 minutes now about kind of the core things that we think are the most important clashes in the debate, the core features of the world that change as a result of the motion and how those link into the core clashes and try and set up a case. So hopefully we have a case at around 6 minutes. Usually we've decided about what we're going to run on top half. Then it becomes about filling out the things that we have to prove in order for the case to be true and coming up with reasons for that. And we do that kind of together up until around 10 minutes. And then for the last 5 minutes, I usually go off and write my own speech because I'm the first speaker. That depends. So I've gotten quite good at being able to write my speech quite quickly. So I can get away with only having maybe 4 minutes to write it at the end. But obviously, I'd recommend that when you're starting off, you might need more time on your own at the end. Then in closing half, it's slightly different. So usually we take longer to brainstorm, maybe 4 minutes, because obviously you need to generate more ideas when you're in closing half. And then it's just about having a discussion about all of those various different ideas for the rest of prep time. trying to emphasize which ones you think are the most likely to not be taken by your opening and are still going to win the debate, developing those out, trying to generate more and more ideas. And usually by the end of prep time, when we're in closing half, we would have a ranked list of about 8 or 9 different ideas that we think that we can run in order of like how likely it is that we want to run them. So like in order of how good we think they are. And that's what we want to leave the closing half preps with. Yeah.
That's brilliant. Actually, that's so brilliant, honestly, because I got a question sent to my direct message right now from somebody named Inam. And he asked me if there's a difference, particularly between the thought process of an opening speaker and a closing speaker. And I think you covered that right away with this question itself. And I want to also answer one question myself, field one question by Arohi, who says, how can somebody new to debating circuit qualify and participate and apply to national international debates? The answer is right here, behind me over here, International Indian Debating League. And we will do the international qualifiers for the Oxford debate very soon, the Cambridge debate very soon. So just go ahead and register for that, and we will see you, Arohi. Now, another thing I wanted to ask you, particularly looking at the questions that have been put forward, let's have a look. What roles do ethics play in your debating style, and how do you navigate morally complex issues during a debate?
Yeah, it's tough. Especially because I do moral philosophy, like that is my degree. So, having to distill that complexity in the form of a 7-minute speech, I think can often be frustrating. But I think with these morally complex issues, I think that it helps to recognize the complexity in your speech. Like, I think it helps to recognize that what you're talking about is a genuine dilemma and like try and be reasonable and charitable towards the kind of moral arguments that other teams are making. And that's how I try and navigate it. Try and be as sensitive as possible to other people. Try and recognize that other people were debating in good faith. That kind of thing. Yeah, I quite like this question about like losing focus. Yeah. So I guess I'll just answer that one as well. Yeah, I think that like during giving the speech, honestly, I kind of you can't lose focus whilst you're giving a speech, I don't think, because you're so in the flow of it that like you don't, it's really hard to get distracted. I know, at least for me personally, I know that some people will get distracted by like people asking POIs in a particular way or something like that. I think you just have to train yourself to not be distracted by those things. By like, doing a practice speech where you ask your friend to constantly interrupt you and still not get thrown off or things like that. So that's how I try and practice to avoid being thrown off in a particular speech. And then for like in general in debates, sometimes you do lose concentration, but I think that's when your partner is really important. So I think it's really important to communicate throughout the debate with your partner, and so your partner can tell when you're losing focus and get you back on track. Yeah.
Understood. And that's wonderful. I hope everybody's questions are answered over there. And go to the last segment of this interview, Aniket. Thank you for being so generous with your time as well. Right. First question: what's your most memorable moment across your debating career?
Mm-hmm.
And the second question I'll come to in a while, and that's really interesting and honestly my favorite question for the night.
All right, so my most memorable moment. So this was at Madrid Worlds, and again, I think this is going to link to what I was saying about debate mainly being about the process and putting yourself in challenging situations rather than winning. Because my most memorable moment is not winning. My most memorable moment is round 9 of Madrid Worlds. So we were opening government. It was some complex patent law motion, and we needed 1 point to proceed to the elimination rounds to break. And we prepared the wrong side from opening government. Me and Zarina prepared the wrong side. And I stood up and started giving my speech. And, about 1 minute and 30 seconds through, I get a point of information that tells me that you're arguing for the wrong side. And there's a moment where I look at Zarina, my debate partner, and look at the motion and realize I've prepared the wrong side. And then I like made up an entire speech arguing for the other side on the spot. And look, it was not a great speech, obviously. Obviously it wasn't, because I had to make it up. But it was decent enough. And then Zarina had 7 extra minutes. And so she was able to give a pretty good speech. And in the end, we ended up getting the point that we needed to break. And we ended up reaching the quarterfinals of that competition, which was a good result. So that's my most memorable moment, is being able to get through that.
That's a very Bollywood masala movie over there, because it's such a nail biter, honestly. And if I was sitting in the same room when I would have looked at your partner, I probably would have, in my mind, fainted right there. But That's a fascinating story. And coming to my last question, the most important of them all, I wanted to ask you, if you had to summarize your entire debating career in a song, which song would it be and
In
why?
a song.
And I understand it's a big question, so you can take your time. You can go through
That is a good question. So I think the song I would choose, it's a very classic English sports song called Football's Coming Home. And that's a song that the England team uses before every World Cup to get everyone hyped up about England doing well at football, although inevitably England will always lose. And that's a song I would use for myself because we would always go into various different competitions kind of hyping ourselves up, but then kind of having this kind of sense of ultimately we might not succeed or whatever. And that kind of combination of like optimism, but also kind of fatalism is captured in that song. And I think is kind of how I see debating now. So that would be the song I'd choose. Yeah.
Understood. That's a fascinating answer, honestly. And I just hope everybody has a motivational song for themselves, perhaps to push themselves forward. And hopefully one day we can have a song like that to summarize all of our debating careers. So thank you so much, Aniket. It has been a pleasure to interview you. I promise you, interviewing you was so much fun. And I learned so much overall. The kind of knowledge I have gained, the things I can apply to my own debating, it's just been a pleasure. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time.
Thanks for having me. I really have enjoyed it. So thank you.
Thank you. Just stop the recording.